It is my honor to now invite to the stage to discuss several other questions David Tsur, Deputy Commissioner, who was also the commander of the border control and the SWAT. Tsur, you are invited to join us here, and also Meni Itzhaki, also a Deputy Commissioner retired, who was the former head of the Investigations and Intelligence Department of Israel Policy, and before that he was deputy to the Jerusalem Arena and head of intelligence of the police, Israeli police. So, again, welcome, Meni, Tsur. Thank you very much for joining us. My first question to you, to continue on the conversation I held with the director of the operations divisions. We all know that Israel is too small for its size, and we've been in deficit for many years. We're dealing with the tasks in a way that's almost impossible. Everybody knows that. Also, the rulers and leaders of this state, and also, even now, 2023, we see no difference. So how would you explain the fact that despite the difficult situation and the feelings of the citizens and the fact that we all know where we have the problems and the deficits, we still haven't seen a decision from the government about an overhaul to the way the police of Israel is being conducted? So first of all, Sigal, I think, presented fairly well the situation. And I would like to maybe comment about the disconnect that I have to the uniforms. I could maybe speak more freely than her. Also, we used to be an MK in the past, so we also have that perspective. Up to this point, you mentioned the good parts of aspects of my biography. You don't have to mention the Knesset part. So regarding the internal security and police forces, as Sigal pointed, indeed, there was a turning point in 1974 when the police started being responsible for the internal security of Israel. And one or two more points at the time. There was a decision that the Israel police, that always is receiving more and more missions and tasks, dropped upon it. And the police became stronger. When you look at numbers, usually with their border control, I used to command those, and you feel the strength. And those data she mentioned, you see the thousands of missing policemen. They are missing at the core of the police, in the stations, in the police cars, and in those very thin legs of the police. So we don't have enough SWATs, enough border control, but the security is wonderful. The police is wonderful for great tasks. But when you want to get a daily, everyday service at the stations, it's very weak. We have great forensics, great intelligence, when the police decides to fight such things. But things need to be said less politically correct, less PC. It's comfortable when it's comfortable. There's an elephant in the room. We need to talk about that. The fact that the police has been weakened for years, as well as since 2017-18, if I'm not mistaken, we have no chief of police for 2.5 years. That's outrageous. Where would you see such an institution? Could you imagine, for example, a military with no chief of staff? Or a head of Shin Bet, 2.5 years, as someone standing for him, and people are saying, no problem, he can do everything, he has all the authorities. No. He cannot plan for the long term. He's always there on condition, which is something much loved by politicians. And at the end of the day, we find ourselves with a police that is always chasing its own tail. I was outside for half an hour, and the word Iran was repeatedly pronounced here in this room and the other room as well, dozens of times, which is comfortable, right? Always speaking of the outside threat. I'm not disregarding it, of course. I was part of the cabinet, security cabinet, and it is significant, right? Take one fighting airplane, and you can solve all of Sigal's problems. All of the beat cops are full in exchange for one airplane. Now, with Israel's internal security, is it not worth it? And people will tell me, as you mentioned, yes, that I was an MK, right? And I sat in the budgetary committees, right? People will tell you there, this analogy of the F-35 airplane is also correct for hospitals, for education, etc., which is right. But priorities, as we see them now, we must say things clearly. There is a conduct here that's been held this way for years without prioritizing the internal safety as it should be, not because it's disregarded, not because someone forgot about it, but it was done intentionally. So Meni, I would like to ask you about that exactly, that Tsur just mentioned, beyond beyond hearing what you want to say about the situation. Why is it intentionally? Why is it conducted this way? Why would a government have an interest of to have a weak police? Look, it was comfortable to have central political echelon people to answer this question, right? But if you want me to give an overview, a bird's eye view, a response for this, I met throughout the years with certain people who wanted to improve the abilities of the police following events that took place, and I am mentioning the crime organizations. We've seen a decision by someone who, and after that they made a very impressive array with great investment, and then within 8-9 months after that, you've seen an amazing turning point from where the criminal organizations are rising and then declining significantly in many, many different disciplines, especially when it comes to fighting crime. It's about perception, conception. It's a lot. I'm really connecting, I'm really feeling what Tsur just said. It's always about face out. And the central pillar that Sigal mentioned of the internal safety, people look at it, impress, say whatever they say, not talking about the 48% that you've mentioned in the previous slide, which is, it's dramatic. 38%, 48% people come and say, I don't feel security. Walking around, or 60-something% amongst the Arabs population. People are not safety. I think there's no attentiveness there, and this is the problem. I want to shed light on another point. People talk here a lot about the judiciary overall. A reform. I don't think it's a reform, personally. The terminology, this is a revolution, a coup. What is missing? And sure, reform to the judiciary is required, a dramatic one, and also for law enforcement. And there was an article written this week. We live this daily. The frustration you feel when you are an officer in the police, the intelligence you must collect, investigations, you come to a case that is ready and mature to be presented to the prosecution. And we've seen anti-money laundering and laws, and we've seen crime union laws against them, and it's great legislations, but then it was not backed with enough judges and enough prosecutors. So you come to a place where you have a case about a crime organization, and then the president of the court says, I can't give you an assembly of judges because we need to have, the prosecution needs to have 3 different judges, which means that he doesn't reside on other cases. So what do? They go and make it in details. So instead of taking someone and putting them in jail for dozens of years, now we do 1 case for extortion, 1 case for violence, and 5 years later you just compromise and you say, okay, you have an amazing case against the person because of the circumstances, you let them go back home. So the frustration is huge. And that's just one example of what should be done. Shortening of the procedures, more judges, more prosecutors to allow the pipelining, not only strengthening one place. If you strengthen the police to get more cases, because people come to the police with saying it's problematic, you're closing the cases. And then this whitewashing priority, how did they call it? In this food chain, police at the very end, sure, it's significant, the significance of what it does, how it acts, what volumes, etc. But as an example, as was mentioned here, the Sigalovich plan. So that's an example of the way there must be synchronization between different systems, and that is also the idea that they came up with in 2003. We've seen immediately response. at the deterrence against crime. And I want to make clear something important. Sometimes when we see the bullying and aggressiveness in schools and on the highways and in public places, and we see violence that has an environmental effect, and they bring about a damage to this internal security sense for people behind the scenes and underground, and you're not aware of them at all. Maybe you don't see a big drug transaction taking place between South America and Israel, but you do feel things that are happening under your nose. So, which is why the governance, as was said here in the title, we must emphasize all of the organization of the state together and perform things on the legislative level, especially legislation and the reinforcement systems all together, and as one hand, one fist, care for this problem, take care of the issue. So, apropos that, I want to ask you something I asked Sigal as well. The whole question of the National Guard founding that is now coming up, I would like to hear from both of you. First of all, how do you see this? Was it founded or not when even the police itself is not able to have enough policemen? And if it will be founded, under whom, under what limitations, etc.? So let's put things between the declarations to media and TikTok and between that and reality. National Guard, the need is following Guardian of the Walls. We've seen that in time and space, and also after October 2000, by the way, at the time and space, the police in parallel is dealing with several violent attacks. It's too hard for the police to react to everything. It's able to react once it gets 24 hours to, get ready and everything with the good intelligence ahead, maybe less than 24 hours. And then it's able to do it. But the National Guard that is based on units, especially, I should say, as Sigal just said, it's on the skeleton of the border control. With all due respect to the minister, to this wonderful, great minister, it's just a private militia. It absolutely shouldn't happen. It shouldn't even be thought of, such a thing. And one more thing is that it's nothing. It's just sand in the eyes when it comes to fighting crime. The National Guard is just more money, more budgets added for emergency. In order to lower crime, we see the graphs now rising, and in order to make them drop, after several years, we've seen a decline significantly, and we need to see people being taken to justice, and we need to see evidence, and we need to work hard, systematically, in an organized manner. And this is why I'm completely not feeling all these models and new organs, etc. I think that at the moment the police has very professional people, very good people in the police who know how to perform their jobs, and they need this in order to help them. And you can't now, disperse your attentiveness. Give your attentiveness and build something stable and give everything needed. And let's change the graphs from, let's say, we talk about incidents of almost doubling the murder cases. So immediately, if you look at this data, you look at the whole spread of the cases and you see at the bottom, probably I don't have the data, but probably at the bottom we see a lot of crime happening. I don't want to talk about the gray area. There's a story of gray area. Those who are wondering whether they should start going harder into crime or not. I think this is not the right time. It's time to stabilize, build, and place on the strong basics and on the knowledge that exists, and then continue on from there. And I'm glad you used those words. And apropos what you said, we are all aware of the media, and we all know what is happening between the government and the police lately. What is maybe contradictory to the need to stabilize and back the police. How do you see things that are now happening between the political echelon and the police higher echelon? and what should be done differently? How should I define it most delicately? There's an effort here to normalize something completely crazy. How can you define it any differently? There is a minister that was appointed, and he has skills for nothing. It's not only him. Look at the police. It's not only this police. It's the one before that and the one before that. And I'm sorry to say that our political method, we don't have a professional government. It's a government made of politicians. What's the connection between housing and Goldknopf? Only that he has many apartments. What's the connection between internal security and Ben Gvir? He knows it from being a criminal himself. So at the end of the day, you have an unprofessional police. And I used to sit at the head of the headquarters for 2 years, and I can tell you something about the connection between the chief of police and the minister. You almost never have these two that don't conflict with each other, don't have conflicts. So what is the problem with this minister and the police? He created politically really high expectations, dramatically high, and he is now obligated to this level of expectations that he created. As a result, he comes to change things from the very bottom, the very delicate relations between the political echelon and the police, because he's changing the law of the police that is not for nothing. Defines the police as independent. It's not political. It's independent, and the chief of police is independent much more than the chief of staff, by the way, of the military, and trying not to intervene in this power relations. And I hope it will not happen. But if it happens, the police, unfortunately today, is, because of all this aggressive media discourse, is perceived as political. And so working with the Arabic population, and if we will have enough time for this, we'll also talk about other interfaces of the police. It's not only the police, it's not only enforcement of the law. And so with the Arabic populations, they are seen as the Ben Gvir police, and that is already a problem. The police must do any effort possible with all the hardship and difficulty to be independent, to project independence, and to give decisions that are lacking any political signs on any subject. I see the protests, for example, in Kaplan or any other places, the left-wing protests. I see the way they are conducted, and I think there's a lot of reason being used there. I think it's done in a very controlled manner in order not to have anything explode, and it's guarded, it's well and very carefully, and they are in a difficult situation, and they must maneuver in this situation and try to prove to the public that it is a political police. Let me share with you something from my memory that suddenly, popped in my memory. It's not only this minister, for years now, as I said. So at the time, we've had a very explosive discussion from your world, Meni, by the way. I don't know if you're aware of this discussion that took place. Uzi Landau was then a minister, and he's from the Jabotinsky branch, and he's a very good man, and he thought the police should not recommend at the end of a case of investigation whether or not to indict, or at least not to make it public. He said they just should give the case to the prosecution, and they should need to make the decision of whether to indict or not. And Moshe Mizrahi, who was the head of the investigation division then, may he rest in peace, and there was a deliberation about this, and there was great pressure because there were investigations of politicians, including the Ariel Sharon, the then prime minister, started with the Greek case, and etc., etc. And at the end, they came to a compromise. The minister can tell the police what is the policy, but not legitimate for him to touch any case or the budget of the investigation, or by telling them what is the policy of the prosecution, as he is asking for himself in this legislation. So the public, some are already bored now. So listening to these nuances, the public doesn't understand. it just goes over their heads, but these are things that change from the very basics, the very delicate relations. And by the way, just to close about that discussion, the compromise was that division of investigation, for example, they would finish a case and write if there are enough evidence, according to their opinion, to indict, because they know it the best, right? They're not just giving it to the prosecutor to start letting them dig in. They must give the recommendation to the prosecution anyway, right? So the thought is, and then they would give the case, present it, not knowing what we meant, what we said. It sounds a bit absurd, right? And then they stopped it. They didn't pursue this no longer. And it's just that we are at very sensitive points, and we must keep the independence of the police. It's not easy. We must do it with pride, and we must remain our principles. And I think that with the people I know, it's possible to do it. And I would like to sum up this very super important and fascinating conversation by asking you one thing. You both have a lot of knowledge from the higher strengths of the police, and you are putting yourself in a place where you are leading the Israel police, and if you put yourself in those shoes, what should the police now do if you were the chief of the police, given the situation, political sensitive situation, and the problematic relations between the political echelon and the police, as we also spoke before that to Sigal, now with you. So tomorrow morning, just to sum up, how should the police be, what actions they should take starting tomorrow morning so that our state out in the streets be better in a while? I listened to Sigal. She gave a very good description of the situation, and I'm sure many experts here can learn a lot from what she said. And I think that the professionals, when they look at the working plans, they need to prepare ones for the long term, the same as Sigalovich at the time, but more broadly, more elaborately, that is focused on the police, what systems are backing what systems, and then just put those down, not let go, maintain those ethical principles for professionalism, and also give projection of what to expect with each one of these moves. I'm not only talking about operations, I'm talking also about recruitment of people, of manpower, etc. And we must work on that very, very hard and put those things on the table and not despair. I understand that everybody is an expert for external security, external affairs. People know every little thing and every little detail about every event that happened, but don't know anything about the very sensitive things that happen within the internal security systems. And we need to bravely put those plans on the table. And there is knowledge; it just needs to be used. Thank you very much. Two things. One, I think that the position of the chief of police now is one of the most, this position is one of the most dramatic ones. He's just, as we say in Israel, he's just fell into a situation that is very complex, and his main job right now is to guard the independence of the police and make sure, as Meni and Sigal said, in her ability not to go into politics, etc., to be a professional, and that the political echelon will allow them to work and just give them what they need to do to perform their work. And I want to say something more general. We always bring the Giuliani example, how he fought crime, how he was able to reduce crime. And he took about 15,000 positions for policemen from welfare, from education, etc. He took them to law enforcement. He created one big, strong police in the States, and he took them for 35-something to much higher than that. And they reinforced the broken window story, etc. And years after that said, Giuliani succeeded. What turned out at the end? Why was he successful? Not because he poured policemen into the streets. They took it 20 years before, and they checked and found that since 82 and until about 2002, there was a decline in crime. And why is that? Because in 82, the parliament made one little law at New York, the New York Parliament. They lowered the allowances for third, fourth child, etc. And that created a lot of families that are less poor, that would less go into crime, and it's completely unrelated to the law enforcement and police. It's something at the national level. And what I want to say here is that we don't see any perspectives of action. We have people completely letting go of every national system, like even the emergency room. Everybody gets to the streets at the end of the day, right? And when there are small crimes, right? Abergil, he grew up in Lud, in the streets. Then he became the big boss, but before that he was just a little criminal. So I would like to thank you very much for participating, David Tsur and Meni Itzhaki, and also to you, Sigal Batzvi, and good luck to all of us.